I'll just do a quick screen share here.
That was the only thing I had time to put on the agenda before we started.
Given that we only have 15 minutes, I think it's the right thing to do. I'll just put in calculating a time to answer heuristic, which I'm sure we won't get, but maybe we'll talk about it next week. So user role. All right. Oh, maybe we could also put on, Michelle, like if you have any blockers on the reformatting of the download list, maybe. I don't think we'll have time to talk about it, but I guess it's more of a ping than anything else.
Yeah.
So I think we talked last week.
Need to work on it a little bit.
Okay, which is totally cool. All right, so I didn't realize you could do this. Details. How'd you get that?
Oh yeah, I've started. You have to type it in HTML, but it's very useful for putting giant text dumps, which I find I have to do often.
Oh, cool. Okay, I'll have to check that out. Wonder if I can see the source of it.
Yeah. I think it should just be the same. You literally type in
just details and summary.
Yeah, a summary tag and a details tag inside of it. So.
All right, so basically, there's some places where we're using user role, some places we're using user ask role. Okay. That's fine. That doesn't need to be edited out, by the way.
Okay.
And I think the big thing is everywhere that we're using, we had this open issue here about this, which is really just says it's a problem that it's done inconsistently. And Bryce, I think your PR basically removes the use of user ask role. There's no longer any places where, well, maybe you could, I might be misexplaining it because I haven't reviewed it right before this call.
So there are two things. So the big, which was one of the, like, essentially this is a rather large bug. I wasn't able to tell if it's present in any of our interviews because it's dependent on, I guess, how the lists are initialized, which depends on interview to interview. But I added the minimum reproduction of if you just have an interview, it includes assembly line, and then you gather users and gather other parties, it will put you in an infinite loop. That docassemble will error out on and say, hey, we found an infinite loop because we try to say, oh, is this the defendant or the plaintiff? We end up asking, that's controlled by an if statement. That's literally, is the user's list equal to the plaintiff's list? And that sometimes in docassemble, just looking at the object itself will trigger the gathering for it. And so if you say you're the defendants and then you fill in your information about the defendants, it's trying to gather plaintiffs, and then it says, hey, is users equal to plaintiffs? Oh, I need to gather plaintiffs. And it does the whole thing and it gets in its loop. And so the main change, which is the thing that is the breaking bug, is using user role. Instead of just users equal to plaintiffs, it's user role equal to the plaintiff instead, since we should just be checking with the role instead. But that was the other thing and that's the other half of it is change of what you said of it's changing. We use user ask role in some places and it should be user role.
The problem is that every interview that comes out of the Weaver says,
I have a PR for the interview. Yeah, I have a PR for the Weaver for that because I do also think that it should be
that use it though. That's the thing. I don't want to break those too.
I'm okay with them. And that's fair. And I'm okay with also changing those too, because I think those should also be asking for user role.
But how will we find and change all of those interviews is my concern.
We have GitHub search is fairly good at that sort of stuff. I am okay if we think that that's the thing we should do is we can, because I don't think changing other interviews to ask for user role before doing before merging this in, I don't think that will break things. So I'm willing to take on, look for all of the existing interviews. It'll probably be a lot of them, but go through all the existing interviews, change to user role instead, publish them, and then
if you want to make a list of them, I might
The
be
problem is
able
they're
to
not all
find
interviews that
some.
we've created or that are on our GitHub
Sure.
organization.
We might not be
Are they
able
not?
to find all of
Okay.
them.
No.
It's not just all of ours.
Can we grandfather something in?
So-
Can we like alias something or?
So also note. So notably, I don't think it will. I guess it will change features or change things. The thing is that if you ask for user ask role in an interview, it will either just not be like the thing is that the bugs are still in those interviews. Like changing this, I don't think changes any actual behavior because, like the bug would still be in the interview unless you have an interview that is like user role, like you've set something in like the metadata to be like, oh, it always starts case and you never change that, which I guess is still just a wrong thing in the interview. But
I just want to scope the change to be as small as we can. So I think we did have several places originally where we were checking like users equals other parties. And I think we probably don't have as many of those anymore. Oh. Let's see.
I remember trying to do a search for that when I started this, but another one would probably be useful.
Wait, no, users equals defendants? That wouldn't be
It
other
would be
parties.
it would either be plaintiffs or defendants. There's one still in the affidavit.
Can't we
the
just change
affidavit
this
consistencies.
right here? Isn't that really the only problem?
That's the main thing, but then the issue is whether you're using. So that's like I said, so it's two things. That's the big problem. That's the bug. And then if you change that, the issue becomes: do you either use user ask role or do you use user role? For essentially all of our interviews now, user ask role is probably fine. It's like that link that the other issue that you mentioned is like there's a whole bunch of complexity depending on what's in the metadata that might break some things, or not break some things, but cause some unexpected behavior. But with e-filing, that's where it starts to break things because we automatically will determine, hey, the user is the plaintiff, and if we specifically are triggering user ask role, it will ask the user anyway, hey, are you a plaintiff or defendant? And if they answer, like if they just mistakenly answer wrong, it breaks a lot of the stuff in the rest of the e-filing interview because we'll be like, oh, everyone's on the defendant's side. Do you have any other plaintiffs? And we let them add random plaintiffs.
Could we
And so-
just call in user ask role? Could we just use the definition of user role and just do it depends on user role?
Because it's usually the other way around. User role is set by setting. If it isn't in the interview metadata, user role is set to the value of user ask role. And so if you try and do the other way around, it would probably be a loop, right?
We could put it behind a defined, I guess, although it's a little bit tricky for something like a code block, which would normally not be triggered dynamically.
But if we're getting rid of user ask role, can't we just instead do something that will make it neutralized?
So we're not getting rid of it. I'm just
See, I don't think it's-
it shouldn't be referred to directly. I think it should be user ask role should set user role if it needs to be set. Otherwise, we shouldn't be using it in most things, because otherwise it'll be user role or user ask role can be set to different things if you end up asking both, or not asking, but if you end up asking for the user role and the program programmatically setting user role to be something different,
Can
it
we
can be
make
set
a
to different
third
things, and that
one?
breaks things.
So this here, this comment implies to me that this was actually used to trigger the user ask role question in some circumstances. So changing it to user role would break that behavior. It would no longer trigger a question at all.
But it still triggers the question. Like that's what I'm confused about, is because that's how user role is set by asking user role. If it's not in the If it's not like in the metadata, and I don't know if it's a part of this PR, I guess.
Is it okay? Let me try and share. Hold on. Try to do a
Okay,
smaller
this,
share on
this
purpose.
sounds weird, but maybe it'll help us think in a direction. Can we not change the ask role to basically be user role, but hang on, and use user role and make a third thing that they both depend on that nobody is using right now?
But like one more step in between.
Yep. And user ask role and user role will basically be the same. And then there will be a third thing.
I think that breaks what we expect, what someone would expect user ask role to do, which would be ask a question.
I mean, the name, yeah, we'd have to have a different, like the name would not match what it does anymore, but that's better than breaking the actual code, right? And we can add a note above user ask role that says, you know, this no longer asks the role, but for reasons of backwards compatibility, it's retaining the name.
I guess I see what you're saying, but I guess if that's what we need to do, I guess we can do that. But that's from like reading the code and trying to understand what things are. That's what I thought user role was supposed to be. Like it seems like we've just added this extra layer, and it's kind of because it was in the Weaver for a bit, and so we've broken all these interviews. And
yeah, but it's
yeah,
yeah,
if that's fine.
I'm not saying it's
ideal.
I'm not saying it's ideal, just that may be the way we have to if we want to avoid the bug and also be backwards compatible.
I still don't. The thing is, I don't know what bug like might be there, because that was the other part of this is that I've tested a lot of the like interviews that are out there. One of them is broken. Which one was it? The interpreter notice is already broken for similar reasons, because it's not actually using the role. It's using like user started case or something, which is again set to a different thing, and it ends up asking user ask role, and so it asks the person, are you the defendant or the plaintiff, and then never uses it again for the rest of the interview, because I think it's because of a different bug. But it's a similar thing of like this is an issue, and I don't necessarily think that this is either like changing this would cause more bugs than already possibly exist. Like,
but maybe you want to remove bugs as opposed to just keeping the same number of bugs.
I do, and I'm willing to go and fix those bugs as a part of our stuff. And,
I'm just really concerned about breaking things that
stuff.
we can't control. Yeah, like I know there's other third parties who are using it. So like changing the meaning of one of the variables, I just want to make sure we know what will happen differently. I don't quite know yet from just this discussion what will happen differently, but and we just want to make sure that's in a way that won't like break those interviews. I don't mind if it does something a little bit different necessarily, as long as it doesn't break them. People can always not upgrade. So like, first of all, like no one's releasing an interview with this particular bug, right? Because it won't run. So sure, we should definitely fix it. That seems safe to do, whatever the smallest fix is, so that there's no longer a loop. But then changing the meaning of the different variables seems a bit riskier, because we don't know who is using them. I
think the thing is, how these are documented, I don't feel like it's changing the meaning. I feel the issue is that we've started using them in a thing that is the wrong meaning. And we can't change
like not just us, so it's like everybody who's ever built on the assembly line potentially, right? Like there's a small subset of forms where you can be either the plaintiff or the defendant. So in a lot of interviews, people won't have explicitly triggered user ask role, but if they did, then we want to not change the behavior of those interviews that we're working from their perspective, right? Just to make it align better with what we think the variable should be. That's why I hadn't tackled that.
How about like what we can try and do is make a change that makes it work for now, deprecate user ask role, and try and change it in our interviews, and then try and see if we can catch whoever else is using it.
We don't need to deprecate user ask role. Like I don't think we would.
But I guess it's a deprecate. That's the deprecation trigger, right? Like if we give it a new meaning, or if we want a
We are
variable that has a
given-
different meaning.
But so I guess I'm not understanding what y'all mean by giving it a new meaning, because we
could
aren't
definitely be missing
giving it a new meaning, and we're simply aligning it with like how it's used. Like I think the issue is that like okay, so like you said, it's either someone has properly set user role programmatically through like interview metadata or something else. It was like typical case or something. If they're triggering user ask role in their interview right now, that's already a bug. That is currently a bug because user role is going to possibly be set to something that's different than what you're asking the user for. And so essentially you're asking the user for something, it's completely ignored and it does something else. That's one case. And the other case of what you were saying of if they do need to
But Bryce, it's only a bug because of like the assumption we're making in the e-filing interview, right? Like if that interview works and runs fine, like it's not a bug the user ever sees. There's just two variables that have different meanings. That
No,
might
it is a bug.
But
so it's like the I link. So if you go to the interpreter notice bug, that's a bug in the interview right now. We ask for it asks for the user role. Are you defendant? Are you plaintiff? And then in the actual PDF we fill in, it does not do the right thing depending on what it asks the user for, because if there's a bug. And it was like a thing that someone had filled out the feedback for back in July, like noting this bug on the interpreter notice.
okay, so walk me through like how I trigger that.
So, okay, the specific bug is selected that you're responding to the case, so you're defendant, and then when you go to enter the other party, it asks for the defendant.
Okay, because this is what should not be. It's
That's what-
saying you are the defendant, so it should not be
Yes.
asking for you being defendant.
Yes. So what I'm saying is that's
This is
one,
like one
possible
form.
scenario. That's
Right.
one form, but that's one way that this would be happening. And I think the other way of, well, you're right, of someone is explicitly triggering user ask role in their interview and they're using it properly. This wouldn't change that because user role will be set, like the way our logic is set up, user role will be set to user ask role.
As long as we can show that like the people who are currently explicitly triggering user ask role will have the same value set in their interview,
Mhm.
then that's fine. I just need to make sure, I need to understand that that's what will happen, which I don't know the full scope of yet, but because I don't think the answer can be rewriting all the other interviews. That feels like not like a good switch to me. But I mean, we can fix the Weaver going forward. That's great if we can do it so that those are more reliable, but we can fix as many of our interviews as we can so that the logic is clear and someone goes back in. But if we're changing the actual behavior of interviews and requiring people to fix them, doesn't feel like the right trade-off to me, but I could be wrong. I'm just trying to think like who is going to be upgrading versus having stuck on an old version of our software. Like if they're on an old version of our software, that's fine. It's really just the people who upgrade that have to be paying attention. They should be looking at change logs anyway. But what would happen if someone is using user ask role right now and we implement this change?
If we implement this change, they're using user ask role right now. We trigger, likely they're somewhere in their interview where they are in their interview order where they're explicitly triggering user ask role. And then they'll go and something else in their interview, likely one of these questions where it's asking for are there any defendants in this case? That will now trigger user role instead of users. To define user role, DocAssemble will go to that one, the VS Code block you had open, where user role is defined to be user ask role, unless the typical role of the interview is set, which I think by default we're setting that to unknown, unless they're saying in the Weaver that it's like always going to be a defendant or always going to be a plaintiff.
Yeah, we might think about changing this. This is like from the way old version, like you can see, but because the fact that it uses wizard, it's okay. Anyway, This may not need to change, stay the same way it is. I don't know if people are explicitly updating this metadata key anymore.
Yeah,
Anyway.
that's fair.
Okay, go ahead. So
And that's it. So the only change will be that instead of directly using user ask role, Docker symbol will try to define user role. It'll go to this block, and then if there's nothing in the typical typical usage, it will just set user role to user ask role.
I guess we shouldn't change this code block, even though I do question its relevance. But yeah. I guess this is seldom runs because user role is usually defined in any newly generated form. So this code block here almost never runs.
User role is explicitly set in new forms?
Almost every form that runs the Weaver, yes.
That was the thing I did not realize. We're explicitly setting user role to things.
So let's go to, I think it's going to be right here. So it's actually set in the interview order block, I guess. I thought it was a standalone block, but I guess I'm wrong.
I see. Okay.
So usually most interviews either have one of these two lines. I think we can assume that the people who we have to worry about updating to this code will have this line like this in the Weaver, because I don't think this has changed. Even though it's in a different file. It's moved in two different files since the first version of the Weaver. I don't think the actual code has changed, because I don't actually really like setting variables like that in the code block usually. And we do set in the metadata block a role if it's defined. But
When
that
is it
will
defined?
almost
Yeah,
never
what's that?
run.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is that defined? Like, I don't remember exactly what that looks like in the Weaver.
Well, it's really just the question, like, is this always the plaintiff, always the defendant, or you don't know? So, and if they don't know, I think it just becomes none, maybe.
Oh, okay, I see it. Yeah, it's exactly that. Of user's role, is it always plaintiff, defendant? Could be either or none of the above. None of the above is NA, which I'm assuming does a similar thing.
Let's see. So, okay, so let's think that through. So if we don't have user role defined in this scenario, but there is user ask role defined. Will that make a different loop?
It's never going to be a loop. I think the bug will always, if new bugs aren't introduced, it would always be something about essentially asking the user the question and then not doing anything with it. Sort of the same version of the bug that shows up now, but just in like for a slightly different cause.
It's definitely a mess. So I don't think it's should be left as is. And I don't know the best way to figure out the impact on other forms. I think if someone explicitly, so most forms other than e-filing forms never care about the value of user role or user ask role, except they want to set the values of plaintiffs and defendants to be the right parties.
Yeah, that's the bug that shows up often. It would either like switch them or just not like ask the user and then ignore it. Is the bugs that are could currently be there, I think, with relating to ask role. I feel like I end up you're right that it's not. It doesn't. Actually, I don't even know if I'd agree with that. Like, I think it's used in quite a few interviews because it's used in a few very popular base or like question library questions. And so you're right that it probably doesn't have a huge effect on the like structure of the interview, but it does end up getting set in a lot of interviews when you're gathering users and other parties.
Okay. Let's see. So, well, I'm trying to think if that changes anything about. But I guess like we should think about like we want to make the e-filing correct. It should have a correct version of it that gets updated if people change their answer. I think that Matt had run into some problems with letting people wanted to change their answer to that, but it's not a situation we'd optimize for. But it sounds like with e-filing, it's more important for that to be correct.
Yeah.
Because it then becomes part of the court record. A lot of forms just use users and other parties because you know who the parties' roles are. So that's the kind of form that I think we've been building the most of. But obviously it's relevant on the affidavit of indigency and the interpreter request form, where it can be used by any person, any role. So does seeing that code from the Weaver, like what most forms have, change anything about the pull request? Where is it? What is it?
I suppose it does a little bit, just because I didn't realize we have also started setting user role directly instead of just calling it.
It's been the same since the first version of the Weaver, I think, when it was renamed from the wizard at least.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's changed. So the difference is like if someone is building a form by scratch, I also feel like there's by hand, like there's different.
Either by hand or just editing what the Weaver does, which maybe I'm just used to editing that more. I don't remember what the starting case for a lot of the forms I've done are.
But we do have like a code block that's like user started case, right?
Yeah, we have, user started cases is another thing of it's either true or false. And that's triggered in a few places. I think that's a separate thing that's needed for e-filing. But that too is dependent. I think that's directly dependent on the value of user role, I think.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, I can double check.
That maybe, but I don't know. It doesn't look like we're defining it in this output here. I think we have form type. And then in the code block, we have user started case, right?
I'm blanking. I think that was part of the change. Or that was part of the PR2. Yeah, that's part of the PR2, is it's changes that to be user role instead of user ask role, because that's another thing that sort of is dependent on user ask role directly. I guess one option of this is just we ignore you. We can one way of moving forward is instead of trying to go back to user role is the final thing and user ask role is the thing that's asked for, like just only use user ask role. And the program can directly set it if it needs to, and then it will never ask it from the person. And we just do that. That's one option. It's slightly better, I think, than trying to add like a tertiary variable that then sets both of them. And if we're not touching logic for user role, so we won't be breaking any additional interviews, and we just need to document that user ask role is now, it can be set programmatically. You need to test in your interview whether it's, and like I don't think we won't be changing it. I don't think we will be changing anything from like the baseline, but like e-filing definitely will be doing some stuff with user ask role if we go that way. And possibly some other things too, but
I mean, I like user role as being like the canonical variable that we use because the name makes the most sense.
I agree.
The user
That's why.
ask role, the whole point is it's when you're asking the person for it.
Yeah,
I just want to
that's
make
why
sure.
I changed, but
Yeah, I want to be careful about like the changes we make in other places in the logic, so that it's maybe some way backward compatible. So, because here, like their user role won't be defined in this code block if someone has said from the beginning, this is an interview where I don't know the user role in advance. So wouldn't it just be simpler just to make another code block that says user ask role is equal to user role, and make sure that it's a lower priority than the question, or add an if modifier on the question, or do something like that? I mean, make it exclusive to certain situations.
well, no, because we have user role being set from user ask role already.
But
That's
yeah, that's only in that code block that I think never actually runs. Because I don't, in newer forms, this code block here, like I don't think this is a primary way. But I see what you're saying, though.
I think that's assuming people get what they get from the interview and then never, or the Weaver and then never modify it.
Yeah, I don't know if we could. I'm trying to think about how to change this. Well, we already say, okay, the first version of the Weaver, there's no typical role. So typical role is not always available. But does that mean we can? I don't think anyone's actually counting on this metadata block being accurate. I don't know if we should rely on the first form as the one that we're using either. Especially because we now, in the Weaver, have a definition of the primary form, right? That's explicit.
I think so, yeah.
That was something
I don't remember, and it's definitely not standardized.
E-filing already, but it's not an old
standardized, but it's not in a lot of,
yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't know. I guess. All right. Maybe it would help to see like exactly where the bug is coming into with the interpreter request, because I don't know if I connect that yet to to this behavior here. See the.
So if I have the pull request that's on this PR, that's the one that fixes this specifically. The issue is that I think whoever weaved this form, I don't know if it's the Weaver part or if it's something that they manually changed. They set it to be starts case instead of existing case, even though the rest of the form is assuming it's existing case. And so because it's set to start case, I think that sets. What does AL form type set? I don't remember.
There are a few questions.
I think it ended up. I think the thing is it ends up directly setting user. No. I think it directly ends up setting started case, maybe user started case, which is also sometimes used to set user ask role. Maybe I need to dive into this more because did I write this down? I may have written this down. We directly trigger ask role.
Is that the one that you were saying?
Yes, yeah. AL form type set equals start case. The assembly line question library will set user starts case to true. And because its user start case is set to true, that defines how it's asking, are there other plaintiffs or are there other defendants? Yes, sorry. This bit of code.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'm guessing. All right. Guessing we check for a user started case for how we name that screen.
No, that's so we're setting user started case is that block above right there. The block above will set plaintiffs to users or defendants to users. User started case is in this block, but it's also in a few blocks. There you go. Several further down, and it's depending on AL form type.
Okay. So if the user started the case, we ask if they're defendant. So it's just the language on this screen. We're setting other parties correctly.
No,
No?
because user started case is equal to true, and in back at line 139, we're setting plaintiffs to users and petitioners and defendants to other parties based on the value of user started case.
I see here. This is where it actually comes into play.
Yeah. Which is, I think, one of the reasons I had decided to make the change of user role, because one, like if user role is directly being set by like an interview metadata or something, that would have prevented that bug in the first place, because user started case would have been triggered user role, and then user role would have gotten it from the metadata instead of directly asking the user first. Maybe. No, is that the same bug? That's the same bug.
I mean, it feels
That's the
like
same
here,
bug, just a different path.
feels
Sorry.
like here it might make sense to keep user ask role and then also trigger user role so that they get both defined and they're in sync.
That's not gonna do that though. I guess would it? I guess it would.
It would.
No, it would. Sorry, it would. I'm blanking. Currently, it maybe it will. That's
The
fair.
problem is like we have some like magic behavior in the original stuff.
Mhm.
It's too many steps. Yeah. This was a student project that probably shouldn't have gone live, or it did. Let's see. So like they used this word party role everywhere. I don't know why, but we didn't change it.
Mhm.
So I feel like there's some specific issues with this one, which are separate from.
Party role is user role. It's title case though. That's all it is.
Right. We probably should remove that like extra variable from this too. But
Yeah, that's
just
fair.
like in the spirit of like minimal changes to the student work, we didn't do that, but probably it'd be better to clarify it so it's more direct.
Okay, yeah, I can. I'm willing to. That can be a separate PR because it won't really.
Yeah, not
That
really
won't
relevant
change
to
anything,
this since it's directly set anyway. Maybe just make an issue for that.
Cool.
Okay, make sure. All right. I don't know where we've left this now, but I guess we've expanded more of like the things that we should have an answer to. Is that right?
Vaguely, but I don't know. Like, I don't think they're. What are the? Because the solutions I still feel are now either do PR as is, document it very well, and note in the change log, maybe bump a Azure version if we feel like we need to. Note in the change log that it's like potentially a breaking change for some people. Other alternative, which is the only other technical alternative I think. No, sorry, two other alternatives. One is using ask, sort of just falling back to still using ask role more instead of user role, which could also, I guess, all of these changes could break anyone because DocAssemble lets you break anyone who does anything. But we fall back to user ask role, which might break people who are using the magic variables, magic behavior of the question library, which we think is less likely than people just directly triggering ask role. and then a third alternative of making another variable that is not user role or user ask role, but sometimes directly sets them if we set it, and then documenting that, which I think it would be the thing that would break people the least, but would also potentially add to the mess and add to more potential bugs for misunderstanding in the future.
Yeah, I think we want to remove variables instead of adding them. I think like the user started case, all of those variables, typical role, these two, I think we can assume are only used internally in the question library. So if we clean up the uses there, we're okay. And I think similarly, I don't think user role and user ask role are generally used in most forms other than to set the value of other parties and users and to show the right text on screen. So in the question library.
Yes.
Again.
Yeah.
So like the main issue is probably like user role or user ask role are being used somewhere else. It's probably like to check a box on a form to say plaintiffs or other part or defendants, and then possibly to say plaintiff's motion versus defendant's motion, which I feel like is not going to break most people's ability to file their form correctly. So we just want to make sure, yeah, if we could simplify or remove things in any of those, that's fine. We want to make sure the question experience is not broken for people, most of all, more than the way that those variables are.
More than the form.
Yeah, and even the template, like they're not going to have their pleading rejected by handing it in on paper. So again, like if we're trying to get that value set correctly for e-filing, that's more important than getting it set correctly for the paper, probably. Because the clerk will, I mean, they should accept that pleading, but I know the e-filing system is different. It requires things in different places. But I want to just make sure people who had something written by the Weaver can still get the right questions in the right order.
Okay, that's at least a concrete test I can try to do of generate a thing with the Weaver as is now, maybe with the Weaver PR as well, and then make sure that this doesn't change any of that behavior.
Okay. And the paths to test are basically directly setting plaintiff, directly setting to defendant, leaving undefined, and choosing both. Okay, so it's just those 4 branches to try. So if we can untangle it without breaking those, then I think it's good to clarify it and keep user role as the main accurate answer.
Cool. Okay.
Okay, that might already be what you're already doing. I just want to make sure that's true.
I will double check those things.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for walking through that with me, because I know it was a lot, but it is also directly blocking a lot of the e-filing stuff.
Yeah, well, thank you for like following up on it. I mean, I don't want our technical debt to keep our code broken forever.
Yeah, I
be careful about how we do it.
Yeah, I understand. This is not the first time that I've run into technical debt blocking me on things, and I don't quite know how to approach it better other than just I run into it and I fix it. But yeah.
Nope, I think that's right. Yeah, and I think, yeah, if we just have to be ready to do a new version if we need to, right? So I want to avoid that because it's painful.
Yes,
to do a new major version. But if we have to, we have to. Yeah, this was just not one I could say like this isn't our patch release. That's all.
No, agreed. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. Well, we're a half hour over, so I'll skip my questions about the testing time to answer fields. But maybe I'll put in a PRR so we can look out for that by the middle of the week, hopefully, because I think it's getting there. I'm just going to put in some guesses. Well, I'll show you what I did anyway, even though I said I'm going to skip it, just so you can see what I'm looking at. Basically going through the different kinds of fields, signature, checkbox, and text fields. And then also somewhere we're going to try to get some signal for how they fit in for the framework from Caroline Jarrett: slot in, gathered, third party, and created for the kind of answer that's expected from the field. Different from the field type. Field type is checkbox, but maybe you still have to think about how to answer that checkbox, right? Could be different from, it's two different metrics of the field. And then I'm just coming up with some numbers, like thinking, okay, it takes so much time to fill in this field based on how much space there is. It's probably going to just be 3 buckets, like I said before. And then also the actual answer gathering part of it, if you have to get it from some other source or create it from your head. So I'm giving some time for the imagination and some time for getting the answer from a third party or from your room or wherever it might be. So that's the basic idea. I'm just going to put in some numbers and then just run them against a bunch of forms and just see what people think, see if the numbers are reasonable. Maybe we can try to use some machine learning later to get lots of opinions on it and train that. But
yeah, it seems like a good, reasonable start. I like the estimate or the confidence part. So
yeah, I'm trying to put in a confidence interval, and I just am saying we're 100% confident for something we think is a slot in answer and 50% confident for something that's not. And that the idea there is if you have 1,000 fields and they're all slot in, you probably did a really good job of estimating how long it takes. But if you have 1,000 fields and half of them are slot in and half of them are, you have to create the answer. People take really different times to create an answer. You still have a lower lit bound on the time it takes to fill it in, which is the time for the 500 slot in fields can't be driven below a minute or so, whatever it is. Half a minute, I guess. I think is what I was using.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So, all right.
Are you?
No, go ahead, Michelle.
Are you doing anything based on the language of the question? Like if they ask how or why, as opposed to how many, or
that would trigger like maybe the classification of the answer as being slot in, gathered, third party, or created. So I'm kind of like working backwards. I'm bootstrapping to like, okay, once we have that, how do we figure out a time to answer? And then how we come up with those classifications of the field type, I don't know yet. But one will be the field name, and we'll probably have some table where we're saying, okay, these known kinds of field names are in this category of answer. And maybe we'll do a keyword search. Like I've added in a type that Caroline Jarrett didn't use, which is affidavit. So I'm like, okay, if it uses the keyword affidavit, which I checked, and there are like about 300 fields that use that name, affidavit, in the field
and
description.
give it a good half hour.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. All right. Cool.
And this will mostly be accurate at scale. So being wrong, but in ways that aren't totally biased in one direction, short or long, is okay.
Yeah, that sounds fair.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it, I guess. I'll see everybody later this week.
Sounds good. See you.
Later, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.